It was Christmas Eve, and Sarah felt a knot of guilt in her stomach. She had promised her 6-year-old niece the perfect gift this year, but had completely forgotten to buy it amidst the chaos of holiday preparations. With only hours left before Christmas morning, Sarah threw on a coat and drove to the mall, silently cursing herself for waiting until the last minute. When she pulled into the parking lot, she noticed how eerily quiet it was. The mall, which was usually bustling with holiday shoppers, now felt deserted. A few cars were scattered across the lot, their windows frosted over in the cold. The parking lot lights flickered intermittently, casting long shadows over the pavement. Sarah hesitated for a moment, the silence unsettling, but she shook off her unease and headed inside. The mall's interior wasn't much better. The usual festive atmosphere was dampened by the emptiness. Most of the stores were either closed or in the process of shutting down, their metal gates half lowered. The holiday music playing over the speakers sounded distorted and echoed hauntingly through the empty halls. A cleaning crew was mopping the floor near the food court, but otherwise the place felt abandoned. Sarah hurried to the toy store, hoping to find the doll set her niece had been talking about for months. As she browsed the aisles, she felt a strange sensation, as if someone were watching her. She glanced over her shoulder, but saw no one. The few other shoppers in the store seemed preoccupied with their own frantic searches. After finding the doll, Sarah made her way to the checkout counter. As she paid, she noticed a man standing just outside the store, leaning against the wall. He was tall and thin, with a scruffy beard and a tattered coat. His eyes were fixed on her, unblinking. Sarah felt a shiver run down her spine, but told herself he was probably just waiting for someone. Bag in hand, Sarah stepped out of the store and began walking toward the exit. The man straightened up and started walking behind her. Her heart rate quickened as she quickened her pace. The man matched her speed, staying about 10 feet behind her. The once familiar hallways of the mall now felt like a maze, the flickering lights casting unsettling shadows on the walls. Sarah's breathing grew shallow as she passed closed stores, their dark interiors feeling like gaping voids. She turned into a side hallway, hoping to lose him, but when she glanced back, the man was still there, closer now. Panic set in, and Sarah broke into a jog. She reached the exit doors and pushed through them, the cold night air hitting her like a slap. Her car was parked far from the entrance, and the lot seemed even darker than before. The man followed her outside, his footsteps echoing against the pavement. Sarah fumbled with her keys as she reached her car, her hands trembling. She could hear the man's footsteps quickening behind her. Just as she unlocked the door, he lunged forward, slamming his hand against the window. "Hey!" he shouted, his voice rough and menacing. His face was inches from hers, his breath fogging up the glass. Sarah screamed and started the car, her hands shaking so badly she could barely grip the wheel. The man pounded on the window again, yelling something she couldn't understand. Finally, she managed to throw the car into reverse and sped out of the lot, tears streaming down her face. She didn't stop driving until she was home, locking every door and window as soon as she got inside. The next morning, Sarah saw a news report about a man arrested at the same mall for attempting to abduct a woman in the parking lot. The description matched the man who had followed her. Sarah couldn't stop thinking about how close she had come to being his victim. Emma hated Christmas shopping. It wasn't just the crowded malls or the long lines at checkout. It was the overwhelming pressure to get the perfect gifts for everyone on her list. But this year, she had no choice. With 2 kids, a demanding schedule, and a husband who worked late, she had left everything to the last minute. On Christmas Eve, she decided to take her 5-year-old son, Liam, to the mall for some last-minute shopping. The mall was a madhouse. Hundreds of shoppers bustled through the brightly lit halls, their arms overloaded with bags. Holiday music blared from every speaker, cheerful and relentless, as children cried and parents bickered. Festive decorations hung from every corner, twinkling lights, oversized ornaments, and wreaths, but to Emma they only added to the chaos. "Mommy, look, a big Santa!" Liam's small voice broke through her thoughts. He was pointing excitedly at a massive inflatable Santa Claus in the center of the mall. Emma smiled, but her mind was elsewhere. She was juggling her shopping list, trying to remember which stores she needed to visit and what she still had to buy. "That's nice, honey," she said distractedly, pulling him gently by the hand. After weaving through the crowds, they finally reached the toy store. Liam's eyes lit up the moment they stepped inside. "Can I look at the cars, Mommy?" he asked, already bouncing with excitement. "Yes, but stay close to me," Emma said firmly, kneeling to his level. "Don't go far, okay?" Liam nodded eagerly and darted off toward a nearby shelf filled with colorful toy cars. Emma sighed and turned her attention to a display of board games, trying to pick out something for her niece. She glanced back every few seconds to make sure Liam was still within sight. But then, for just a moment, her focus slipped. A man brushed past her with a large bag, and Emma stepped aside to let him through. When she looked back, Liam wasn't there. Her heart skipped a beat. "Liam," she called, her voice calm but strained. She scanned the aisle, expecting to see his little blue jacket poking out from behind a shelf. But he wasn't there. "Liam!" she called again, louder this time. Panic began to rise in her chest as she walked quickly down the aisle, peering around corners. The store was packed with parents and children, but there was no sign of her son. Emma's breathing quickened as she rushed to the front of the store. "Have you seen a little boy? He's 5 years old, wearing a blue jacket," she asked one of the employees, her voice trembling. The young cashier shook her head, looking concerned. "Let me call the manager." Within minutes, the store manager and a mall security guard were by her side. Emma could barely hold back her tears as she explained what had happened. "He was right there," she said, pointing to the toy aisle. "I looked away for just a second." The security guard nodded reassuringly. "We'll find him, ma'am. Let's check the cameras." Emma followed them to the security office, her hands shaking. Her mind was racing with worst-case scenarios. What if he had wandered outside? What if someone had taken him? The security footage felt like a lifeline and a nightmare all at once. Emma stared at the grainy black and white screen, her eyes darting frantically across the images. There he was, her Liam, walking near the toy aisle. Relief washed over her for a moment, but then her stomach dropped. On the screen, a man in a dark hoodie appeared next to Liam. He bent down as if speaking to him, then gestured toward the back of the store. Liam hesitated, but eventually followed the man out of the camera's frame. "No," Emma whispered, her voice cracking. "Where is he taking him?" The security guard rewound the footage and followed the pair through different camera angles. The man led Liam toward an emergency exit at the far end of the mall. Emma felt like the air had been sucked out of her lungs. "We have to go now," she shouted, grabbing the guard's arm. The 3 of them rushed to the emergency exit. The cold night air hit Emma's face as they pushed through the heavy doors. The parking lot was nearly empty, the shadows long and menacing under the flickering lights. "Liam!" she screamed, her voice echoing in the stillness. At first, there was no response. The silence was deafening, and Emma's heart pounded in her chest. Then, from somewhere near a dumpster, she heard a small, trembling voice. "Mommy?" Emma ran toward the sound, tears streaming down her face. Behind the dumpster she found Liam crouched on the ground, his little face streaked with tears. He threw himself into her arms, sobbing uncontrollably. "He said he had candy," Liam choked out between sobs. "He said he wanted to show me something." Emma held him tightly, her own tears falling freely now. "It's okay, baby. You're safe now. Mommy's here." The security guard searched the area, but the man in the hoodie was gone. The police arrived shortly after, taking Emma's statement and promising to review the footage to identify the man. That night, as Emma tucked Liam into bed, she couldn't stop replaying the events in her mind. The thought of how close she had come to losing him made her stomach turn. She kissed his forehead and whispered, "I love you, Liam." "More than anything." Liam nodded sleepily, clutching his favorite stuffed animal. "I love you too, Mommy." Emma stayed by his side until he fell asleep, vowing never to let him out of her sight again. The memory of that night would haunt her for years to come, a chilling reminder of how quickly everything can change. It was a week before Christmas, and Melissa was determined to finish her holiday shopping. She had always loved the festive season, the twinkling lights, the cheerful music, and the crisp winter air. But the stress of finding the perfect gifts weighed heavily on her. That evening she decided to visit a quaint, old department store she hadn't been to in years. The place had a reputation for unique, vintage items, and Melissa thought it might offer something special for her loved ones. The store was quiet, almost eerily so. Unlike the bustling malls, this place felt frozen in time. Faded garlands and dim fairy lights hung lazily from the ceiling, and a faint musty smell lingered in the air. The mannequins in the window display were dressed in old-fashioned holiday outfits, their glassy eyes staring out into the dark street. As Melissa stepped inside, a little bell above the door jingled, announcing her arrival. The sound echoed through the empty store. She walked through the aisles, admiring the strange collection of items, antique ornaments, handmade scarves, and dusty porcelain figurines. "Can I help you find something?" A voice startled her. Melissa turned to see an elderly woman standing behind the counter. Her face was pale and thin, her eyes sunken but sharp. She wore a dark green cardigan and had a customer service smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Oh, I'm just browsing," Melissa replied, forcing a polite smile. "Take your time," the woman said, her voice flat. "But we'll be closing soon." Melissa nodded and continued exploring. She wandered into the clothing section where a row of mannequins stood. They were arranged in a semicircle, dressed in heavy winter coats and vintage dresses. Their faces were smooth and featureless, yet somehow unnerving. One mannequin caught Melissa's attention. It was positioned slightly away from the others, wearing a long red dress that shimmered faintly under the dim lights. Unlike the others, this one had detailed features, a pale sculpted face with hollow cheekbones and thin lips that curved into a faint, unsettling smile. For reasons she couldn't explain, Melissa felt drawn to it. The mannequin's dark eyes seemed to follow her as she stepped closer. She reached out to touch the fabric of the dress, but a sudden chill ran down her spine. She pulled her hand back, feeling foolish. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Melissa jumped and turned, to see the elderly woman standing behind her again, as if she had appeared out of nowhere. Yes," Melissa said, her voice shaking slightly. "It's very unique." The woman's smile widened, but it didn't feel comforting. "It's one of our oldest pieces, a real treasure of the store." Melissa nodded awkwardly and decided it was time to leave. She thanked the woman and made her way toward the exit, glancing over her shoulder at the mannequin one last time. It still seemed to be watching her. As she stepped outside, the cold night air hit her, and she breathed a sigh of relief. The unsettling atmosphere of the store faded as she walked back to her car, bags in hand. That night, Melissa couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. She checked the windows and locked the doors before going to bed. But as she lay under the covers, her thoughts drifted back to the mannequin's lifeless eyes and eerie smile. At some point, she drifted off into a restless sleep. Around 3 a.m., she woke suddenly. The room was dark, but something felt off. The air was heavy, and her heart pounded in her chest. She reached for her phone to check the time, and as the screen lit up, she saw it. In the corner of her room, standing perfectly still, was the mannequin from the store. Melissa froze, her breath catching in her throat. Its dark eyes gleamed faintly in the dim light of her phone, and its red dress seemed to shimmer unnaturally. She wanted to scream, but her voice wouldn't come. The mannequin's head tilted slowly to one side, its smile widening ever so slightly. With trembling hands, Melissa reached for the lamp on her nightstand and turned it on. The room flooded with light, and the mannequin was gone. Melissa sat up, her chest heaving as she struggled to catch her breath. It had to be a nightmare, she told herself. But when she looked down at the floor, she saw faint, wet footprints leading from the window to the corner where the mannequin had stood. She didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next morning she returned to the department store, determined to get answers. But when she arrived, the building was empty, the windows boarded up. A "for sale" sign hung crookedly on the door. Confused, Melissa asked a passerby about the store. The man gave her a strange look. "That place? It's been closed for years. The owner passed away a long time ago. No one's been inside since." Melissa's blood ran cold. She glanced back at the boarded-up windows, her mind racing. She couldn't explain what had happened, but she knew one thing for sure. She would never go Christmas shopping alone again.